Don't you dare show up at my college entrance ceremony next month, you fake mom.
Alan, my husband Scott's son from a previous marriage, told me bluntly, not even trying to hide his displeased expression. As he shamelessly devoured the celebratory meal I had prepared for his acceptance, Alan clicked his tongue at me, unable to conceal his shock at my appearance.
Why are you so surprised? You even showed up uninvited to my high school graduation. People thought a woman with your saggy body was my mom, and it was humiliating for me.
Alan spat out venomously, recalling the recent high school graduation ceremony. It was true that I wasn't Alan's real mother, and my husband Scott and I are 8 years apart. But that's precisely why I had tried to be considerate. Sure, I had been exhausted and maybe my dark circles were showing, but I had even gone to the beauty salon to get dolled up. I couldn't have looked bad enough to warrant such hurtful comments. Even if Alan wasn't my biological son, it was my only son's graduation. I had rearranged meetings and business deals, somehow managing to take the day off to attend, and yet this was how he felt about me. It made my heart sink. Moreover, Scott, who should have defended me, instead crudely laughed at the sight of Alan attacking me.
Well, I guess there's only so much a makeup can do. She's an old woman after all. Seriously, for someone working at a trading company, having her around must really bring down the efficiency of the people around her.
Scott and Alan gradually got more and more animated, talking about how ugly and old I had become. Aging is a natural process that everyone goes through, yet they mocked it as something hideous and looked down on me. Ah, this marriage was indeed a mistake, I realized once again with a pang. I've always had terrible luck with marriages. My first husband had easily cheated on me, and after the divorce, I had remained single for a long time. As I approached my mid-50s, feeling a sudden longing for companionship, I had been enjoying a drink at a bar after work when Scott happened to sit down next to me. Apparently, Scott too had been cheated on and had just gotten divorced. Perhaps because we had that in common, Scott and I started frequently meeting up at that bar. Before I knew it, I was being introduced to Scott's son Alan. A high school student aiming for medical school, Alan seemed to take after Scott in his politeness and diligence. I decided they were the family I wanted to become a part of. I had thought that after making the big decision to remarry, a warm family life would be waiting for me. But gradually, they started draining my salary while treating me like a housekeeper. It was only then that I realized I had been thoroughly ensnared in their intricately woven spider web of a trap. Like a trapped butterfly, perhaps struggling was futile. But was this really okay? Was I really content to let these men, who didn't even see me as human, say whatever they wanted about me?
That's going too far, even for you. I retorted, unable to contain my anger for once. Shut up. Are you gonna lecture me again? I told you to stop acting like you're my mom.
Alan raised his voice even louder at my rare display of backbone. As Alan saw the tears welling up in my eyes, he clicked his tongue in annoyance.
Seriously, why did you even marry a woman like this, Dad?
Put on the spot by Alan's pointed gaze, Scott's shoulders jumped in surprise before he hurriedly tried to appease his son.
Sorry about that, Alan. Come on, Carol, you apologize too.
With those words, Scott tried to push my head down in a forced bow. This was ridiculous. Why should I have to apologize?
Fine, I get it.
Saying that, I stood up from my seat. Then, on the day of the university entrance ceremony we had been waiting for, they were confronted with a shocking revelation from the school administration. Due to the $12,000 in unpaid tuition fees, your acceptance has been revoked.
What?
My name is Carol. a 55-year-old woman working at a trading company. I'm fortunate to hold the position of Director of Corporate Planning, allowing me to live comfortably without financial worries. I was married once in my 30s, but that ended in divorce due to my ex-husband's infidelity. For a while after that, I threw myself into my work. But about a year ago, I happened to meet Scott at a bar I had stopped by on a whim. He had taken the seat next to me at the counter by chance, and as we got to talking, we discovered that we had both been cheated on and divorced, finding a sense of camaraderie in our shared experiences. Before long, we started seeing each other outside of the bar as well. Scott was 47 and, to my surprise, worked at one of my company's client firms as a sales manager. He had a son, Alan, who was in his third year of high school. Almost without realizing it, the three of us started having meals together frequently. Alan was aiming to become a doctor and was constantly studying for the brutally competitive entrance exams. Yet, he never seemed bothered about taking time away from his studies to have dinner with us. On the contrary, he was a polite and upstanding young man. I suppose he took after his father Scott's courteous and hardworking side. It was only natural that the fondness I felt for them steadily grew stronger and stronger. After meeting up as a trio so many times, I found myself wanting to support Scott and Alan however I could. So, when Scott proposed, I gladly accepted. Remarrying in my 50s, I was too embarrassed to wear a wedding dress, so we didn't have a ceremony. But with Scott being a sales manager at one of our client companies, both of our firms celebrated with a grand reception party. I likely wouldn't be having any children with Scott, but I had Alan who looked up to me as well. I thought I could finally build a warm, loving family. Carol, hand over your wallet. Wow, you've got quite a bit in here. Saying that, Scott snatched my wallet as I came home from work, pulled out all the cash I had inside, and stuffed it into his own wallet. I silently picked up my discarded wallet, brushed off the dust, and put it back in my purse. I didn't even have the energy to protest or demand he return the money anymore. I seem to have a truly unfortunate fate when it comes to marriage. From the moment we registered our marriage, they changed completely. As soon as Scott realized that my salary was higher than his, he started pouring all of his earnings into gambling and alcohol. I knew he liked to drink since we met at a bar, but he had told me he didn't gamble. I had believed his words, but that was a lie. Scott's way of playing was so skilled that calling it a first-time gambling addiction would be an understatement. He was far too accustomed to it. And soon after Scott started living it up, the once kind Alan underwent a drastic change as well.
Don't just stand there spacing out. You're in the way, move.
Returning from cram school, Alan roughly shoved past me as I stood frozen in the hallway near the entrance.
Eek! Don't make such a girly scream, it's gross.
As I let out a shriek from hitting the wall, Alan clicked his tongue in irritation and spat those words at me. But this much was still tolerable. Whenever he was unhappy with his test results at cram school or regular school, he would hurl even worse verbal abuse at me. He was probably venting the stress from his entrance exam studies on me. I remember one time when I scolded Alan for his attitude, he gave me an incredibly cold look.
Are you misunderstanding something? We graciously decided to become family with a worn-out woman in her 50s like you. Don't act like you're my mom.
I was stunned by his words, clearly looking down on me. If I recall correctly, that was the day I had carefully considered what to buy and cook to help with his exam studies. Wiping up the eggs splattered on the floor, I cried at the thought that this was how he saw me. Scott, watching TV behind me, didn't offer to help or comfort me. These days, the word divorce keeps crossing my mind. But after the company threw us such a grand celebratory party, I can't exactly turn around and say we got divorced right away. Even if I quietly got divorced without saying anything, it would quickly spread through the internal company procedures. And while I'm not obligated to report it, I can't not pay my respects to the executives who orchestrated everything for us. I had many sleepless nights, plagued by headaches. And while I was agonizing over choosing the wrong marriage partner, unable to muster the resolve for divorce, Alan passed the entrance exam for the highly competitive medical school he had been aiming for on his first try. Thinking he would finally be free from the stress of entrance exams, I felt even more relieved than Alan himself. However, after receiving his acceptance letter, rather than going back to his old self, Alan got carried away with the success and escalated his verbal abuse towards me. Complaining was a given, and whenever I entered his line of sight, he would kick the floor or chairs and hit the walls as if to show how unpleasant it was for him. He even threw laundry at me once. Today too, as I came home utterly exhausted from work, Alan complained as if he was forcing himself to eat my cooking.
Is the food not ready yet? Hurry up and make it. I'm doing you a favor by eating it.
Even though I had already prepared the ingredients for the celebratory meal the day before, as soon as I got home, before I could even change out of my work clothes, I tiredly put on an apron and started making the side dishes. My nerves were completely frayed from the stress of repeatedly double-checking everything to make sure my poor health wouldn't affect my work performance, but none of that mattered to these two. Despite it being a celebration of Alan's acceptance, they had come home early and were relaxing in the living room as usual, not lifting a finger to help. And as if to add insult to injury, Scott laughed.
Hey, Carol, are you making Alan complain again? He's going to be a doctor in the future. Don't make him waste his precious time.
Instead of admonishing Alan, Scott berated me as if it was my fault for making Alan say such things. Ever since Alan's acceptance was confirmed, Scott had been putting me down even more than before, together with Alan, as if to appease him. One time, when I was crying alone in the living room in the middle of the night, Scott spat out these words to me.
Anyone can see who's the better choice to side with, between you who will retire in less than 10 years, and my son who will be earning a high salary as a doctor for decades to come.
I can never forget his face as he sneered at me, looking like a demon. At Scott's words, I shuddered, my face turning deathly pale. To them, I wasn't a life partner or anything of the sort. I was just a convenient person to bring in money and do the housework. There wasn't a shred of the warmth I once felt there. I gripped the kitchen knife tightly, biting my lip in frustration. For me, who had been working just as hard as any man at the trading company, being treated like a mere housekeeper was an even greater humiliation than when I discovered my first husband's infidelity. But divorce. As I was consumed by such circling thoughts, carrying the finished dishes to the table where Alan sat with his legs outstretched, he let out a sigh dripping with sarcasm.
This is the celebration for my acceptance? What the hell? Can't you put out something more luxurious? Unbelievable. I got into medical school, you know? Right, Dad?
Seriously, is this all you could prepare? Even with the roast chicken, sushi, colorful salads, and stewed dishes crowding the table, it seemed to fall far short of the luxurious meal they had in mind. I knew they would have a nasty attitude, but I also knew how much time and effort Alan had poured into his studies to overcome this difficult hurdle. That's why I had taken the time to make everything from scratch, hoping to please them even a little, but I was made painfully aware of my own foolishness. Their incessant complaining showed no signs of ending. If they were going to complain anyway, I might as well not cook at all, but if I bought something from the store, they would complain even more than when I made it myself, calling it half-assed or cheap. Ever since I was verbally abused for buying deli items when I came home late from overtime, I stopped serving store-bought food as is.
I'm sorry. could you please eat it?
I said, pleading with them while holding back my frustration. If I didn't, they would never start eating. Even as they grumbled about how bad it was, I sighed in relief as the food disappeared into their mouths one after another. It seemed they were in a good mood today. I would save the extra ingredients I bought in case they demanded I remake the meal for tomorrow. That's when it happened. Stuffing his face to the point of vulgarity, Alan suddenly looked up as if remembering something.
Oh, right. Just to make it clear, don't you dare show up at my college entrance ceremony next month, you fake mom. What?
I reflexively lifted my head from where I had been looking down, my eyes meeting Alan's, who made no attempt to hide his displeasure.
Why are you so surprised? You even showed up uninvited to my high school graduation. People thought a woman with your saggy body was my mom, and it was humiliating for me. But
I was stunned by his spiteful words. Sure, I had been exhausted and maybe my dark circles were showing, but I had even gone to the beauty salon to get dolled up. I couldn't have looked bad enough to warrant such comments. Even if Alan wasn't my biological son, he was my only son now, and it was his graduation ceremony. I had rearranged meetings and business deals, somehow managing to take the day off to attend, and yet this was how he felt about me? As I sat there in shock, Scott added insult to injury.
Well, I guess there's only so much a makeup can do. Haha, she's an old woman after all. Seriously, for someone working at a trading company, having her around must really bring down the efficiency of the people around her.
The two of them gradually got more and more animated, talking about how ugly and old I had become. I may be pushing 60 soon, but this wasn't the kind of topic to laugh about while clapping your hands in front of a woman.
Hey, that's going too far, even for you. Shut up! Are you gonna lecture me again? I told you to stop acting like you're my mom.
When I angrily talked back, Alan cut me off with a shout.
Acting like your mom?
My words echoed in the now silent dining room. I couldn't find anything else to say. He had been such a good kid at first. He was under a lot of stress from his entrance exams now. I had become his mom, so I had to be patient. I kept telling myself that, over and over. Even if I was verbally abused by someone else's child who was already an adult, I had thought that if he accepted me as his dad's wife, I would do my best to be his mom.
Listen up. I don't think of you as my mom, not even a tiny bit. It pisses me off just having a fake like you hanging around our house.
Not even trying to hide his anger, Alan stabbed his fork into the chicken. I had been wrong in my thinking from the very start. He had never accepted me at all. Seeing the tears spilling from my eyes, Alan clicked his tongue in annoyance.
Seriously, why did you even marry a woman like this, Dad?
Put on the spot by Alan's pointed gaze, Scott's shoulders jumped in surprise before he hurriedly tried to appease his son.
Sorry about that, Alan. Come on, Carol, you apologize too.
With those words, Scott tried to push my head down in a forced bow. This was ridiculous. Why should I have to apologize?
Fine, I get it.
I brushed off Scott's hand and stood up forcefully, making a loud noise.
What's gotten into you all of a sudden?
Surprised by my action, Scott recoiled and stared at me in confusion. Alan also looked up at me with his mouth agape in shock.
I can't take it anymore. I'm sick and tired of this.
I took off the apron I was still wearing, crumpled it up, and threw it at Scott before heading to the bedroom. As I pulled out the large suitcase I had bought for long business trips, Scott and Alan hurriedly chased after me.
Hey, where do you think you're going?
I had no desire to answer their bewildered voices anymore. I wasn't living just to be at their beck and call.
I'll send you the divorce papers later.
After packing the bare essentials into my suitcase, I headed straight for the front door.
Divorce? If she says she's leaving, just let her go, Dad.
In contrast to the shocked Scott, Alan's mocking words were cut off by the door slamming behind me. I had been wrong. I should have made this decision much sooner. I must have been out of my mind to waste my time on these bastards. The day I left the house, I stayed at a hotel near my office. The next day, I immediately went around to the people and places that had helped us when we got married, explaining the reasons for the divorce and apologizing. Although they were surprised at first, they must have sensed something from my usual demeanor. At the very least, none of my colleagues at work tried to dissuade me from the divorce. About a month after submitting the divorce papers, my cell phone was buzzing with a barrage of calls from Scott. As I was working, feeling a sense of comfort in the tranquility I had finally regained and the busyness of the new fiscal year, I furrowed my brow and excused myself from my coworkers before getting up from my seat. Stepping out into the emergency stairwell of the office building, I sighed and answered the phone.
What is it?
Before I could even get the words out, Scott's furious voice blared in my ear.
Hey, what the hell is going on? Calm down, what are you talking about?
I was fed up with his shouting voice that didn't even bother to identify himself. Even if I could tell who was calling from the phone number, would it kill him to at least say his name? With that thought, I sighed and prompted him to continue. Then, an entirely unexpected response came.
Alan's acceptance to the university has been revoked.
Huh?
Did he get involved in some kind of incident?
After blurting that out, I suddenly had second thoughts. Why should I care about someone else's acceptance being revoked?
Well, whatever the reason, it has nothing to do with me anymore, so don't call me about it.
As I said that and moved the phone away from my ear to hang up, Scott started yelling so loudly that the screen vibrated.
Cut the crap! It's your fault for not paying the tuition. What? Why would I be the one to pay his tuition?
I gripped the phone tighter and retorted upon hearing his words. But Scott didn't stay silent either.
You're the one with the higher income, so of course you should be the one paying. I even gave you all the paperwork for the procedures.
What was he suddenly going on about? As I furrowed my brow, I suddenly remembered. He had indeed dumped all the bothersome paperwork on me, but on the day I left the house, I had gathered it all and left it behind.
I put all the paperwork together in an easy-to-find place, didn't I? Yeah, and I submitted it as is. After doing all that, why didn't you pay the tuition?
Scott shouted in frustration at my words, and the headache I had forgotten about came rushing back. Sighing, I looked up at the sky, wondering if happiness was really slipping away from me.
Don't try to pin this nonsense on me. Besides, didn't the university try to contact you to confirm?
When I said that out of exasperation, Scott stammered and started making excuses.
Well, it was from an unknown number, so I thought it might be a suspicious call. I can't believe this. You blocked the number without even checking who it was?
I stared at Scott in disbelief over his unbelievable statement. Come to think of it, I vaguely remembered Scott saying something like this before.
As a manager, I get so many annoying calls from who knows where. I'd block them right away, but it's a never-ending battle.
He had bragged about it proudly, but I bet he never dreamed it would come back to bite him like this. Besides, he had left checking the mail to me for the longest time, so knowing him, he probably didn't even bother to look at the reminder letters. I'm sure he didn't even notice the notification about the acceptance being revoked. But all of this was a tragedy of his own making. It was none of my concern.
This is your fault. Go apologize to the university right now and pay the tuition.
That's why I was troubled by him trying to shift the blame like this.
Don't be ridiculous. We're already divorced. Why should I have to pay for a stranger's tuition?
Ignoring Scott's loud ranting, I hung up the phone and hit the block button. God, how foolish can I be? I should have blocked his number right from the start. With a heavy sigh, I went back to work. During my lunch break that day, as I stepped out to get something to eat, Scott and Alan stood in my way.
It's because you were too stingy to pay the tuition that I.
Their matching new suits were wrinkled, and they were both panting, as if they had run here. They glared at me with hatred in their eyes. Their arguments hadn't changed one bit. In other words, they insisted that it was my fault Alan's acceptance had been revoked. So they repeated the unreasonable demand Scott had made over the phone earlier, telling me to take responsibility and somehow get Alan enrolled. They can go ahead and be angry, but they're directing their anger at the wrong person.
Look, how many times do I have to tell you? Scott and I are already divorced. I never adopted Alan, so he's a complete stranger to me.
I probably didn't even have the energy left to sigh anymore.
In the first place, why should I, a stranger, have to pay for his tuition when his actual father wouldn't?
Scott's face flushed red with anger at my logical argument, as if I were lecturing a child.
Shut up! You were the higher earner, so of course you should pay. Spouting all this bullshit, my ex-wife and now you? Women are so.
No matter how much I explained, not only did he refuse to back down unless he got the answer he wanted, but he even made misogynistic remarks. That's when I took out a certain item.
Hey, could you listen to this for a second?
In my hand was a small recorder. The truth is, over the past few months, I had been recording every single relentless verbal abuse and attempt to force me into submission through violence from Scott and Alan. When I played it back, their faces turned visibly pale.
If you don't stop this now, I'll submit this to the police.
At the word police, Scott visibly cowered, looking like he might collapse at any moment. But Alan took a deep breath and then put on that nasty, mocking sneer.
Ha, I'm an elite, you know. I'm just giving some guidance to an incompetent old hag.
Alan, acting all high and mighty as if he were in the right, put his hands on his hips and puffed out his chest.
The police, huh? I'd like to see you try. Who's gonna listen to a woman like you? Hey, Alan! Cut it out!
Scott hurriedly tried to stop Alan, who had started provoking me, probably realizing that the odds were against them. But that seemed to have the opposite effect. Alan, who had been put on a pedestal all this time, kept repeating his disparaging comments about me and his misogynistic remarks as if he himself were the law. Shoving aside the panicking Scott, he spat in my direction. And before long, his loud voice had caught the attention of the rubberneckers around us. Along with the murmuring, I could see cameras being pointed our way. But Alan probably didn't notice this due to his anger. He kept hurling abuse at me as I took it all in with a blank expression.
Are you all right, Carol? I'll call the police right now.
One of my colleagues who had also been about to go out for lunch seemed to have noticed that I was at the center of the commotion and hurried over to me.
The police? Alan, we're leaving.
When he saw her take out her cell phone to dial 911, Scott let out a scream. Then he dragged Alan, who was still popping veins in his forehead, feeling like he hadn't said enough, and they fled the scene.
Are you okay, Carol?
The colleague who had rushed over asked me again, looking at me with concern.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for your help. You were just about to go to lunch, right? Shall we go together?
Perhaps I had been more tense than I realized, as I felt the strength leave my shoulders in relief. I invited her to lunch, my treat, as a thank you for helping me, and we went to eat our now delayed meal. When I returned to my desk, Thinking that the unexpected incident had taken up quite some time, one of the executives called out to me and led me to the conference room. It seemed I wouldn't be able to catch a break just yet.
About the commotion earlier, we had the unfortunate timing of having someone from Scott's company here to see us. They want to hear what happened.
As he explained this to me on the way, I felt a chill run down my spine. Unfortunate timing was an understatement. In the end, I had caused trouble for both my own company and theirs.
I deeply apologize for the disturbance.
As soon as I entered the room, I bowed deeply. Even if it was a private matter between a divorced couple, I had gotten into a fight with a client company's sales manager right in front of the office. It seemed only natural that they would want to know the details. I explained the full sequence of events leading up to the earlier commotion, as well as the reasons for our divorce. If I tried to gloss over things or lie here, it might end up disadvantaging both my company and theirs. After all, we were dealing with Scott. There was no telling what he might pull.
I can't believe this. You've been through a lot. Our employee has caused you a great deal of trouble. And we apologize for making you discuss your private matters.
The client company representative turned pale and apologized profusely after hearing the story. Even those who had been deceived by Scott's facade, thinking there was no way that sales manager could be like that, immediately changed their tune when I played the recordings.
The cause of the earlier commotion is all here in these recordings. If Scott tries to tell any lies, then... Of course, with this evidence, we fully trust your side of the story, Carol.
When I voiced my concerns, everyone present nodded in agreement. I wasn't sure how things would go on Scott's end, but it seemed I would be able to avoid any disciplinary action for causing the commotion. With that thought, I let out a sigh of relief. 6 months later, accompanied by my lawyer, I decided to have a discussion with Scott and Alan about the future. Of course, it was a discussion about how I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them from now on. But for some unfathomable reason, the words that came out of Scott's mouth were utterly ridiculous.
Carol, we were wrong. I'm sorry. Let's keep doing our best as a family from now on. What?
I couldn't help but let out a discordant voice. As I stood there baffled, Alan added insult to injury.
I was in the wrong, so please, be a real mom to me this time.
I felt goosebumps all over my body. The first thing that popped into my head was just one word: disgusting. Both Scott and Alan had put on that seemingly kind and sincere demeanor they had when they first approached me, trying to ensnare me once again. Now that I knew their true faces, the smiles plastered on their faces only filled me with revulsion. How many women had Scott and Alan deceived like this, I wondered. Even the lawyer accompanying me was visibly on guard.
Don't say such ridiculous things.
That was all I could manage to say in response. As if to protect myself, I gripped my left arm tightly with my right hand. Seeing my sour expression, Scott persisted even further.
Come on, don't say that. Today's discussion is for that purpose, right? Let's properly live as a family again, okay?
His tone was almost coaxing, and I felt a chill run through me. I shook it off and firmly refused.
Absolutely not. I don't want you coming to my office like before. Don't ever come near me again.
At that, Scott, who had been playing nice until then, finally seemed to reach his limit. He slammed his hand on the table with a bang, trying to intimidate me.
You get all high and mighty just because we apologized? Listen up. The only reason we came here today was because we were willing to start over. We're saying we'll remarry you. Who do you think you are?
His nostrils flared as he took deep, excited breaths. Both my lawyer and I stared at him in disbelief. They hadn't changed at all from before. They were just hiding their demonic true selves beneath a kind facade. My lawyer, who had been cowed, came back to his senses and composed himself, broaching the subject anew.
The reason we asked you to come here today is to explain the compensation claim for the divorce trial and to have you promise to refrain from contacting Carol for the rest of your lives.
Saying this as calmly as possible, he placed a single invoice in front of Scott. The moment they laid eyes on the paper titled Compensation Claim, Scott and Alan bared their teeth, openly displaying their anger.
Huh? Compensation? What compensation are you talking about? You're the one who up and left on your own. The saggy hag is just making false accusations to get money.
The two of them were making a huge fuss, but my lawyer seemed to be getting used to it and handled them without flinching.
Please don't raise your voice. Even that completely immoral behavior of yours is more than enough grounds for a compensation claim. But Scott, you were cheating on her, weren't you? What? Don't be ridiculous. I never cheated.
Faced with the lawyer's stern gaze, Scott's earlier bravado vanished in an instant, and he visibly panicked. It seemed Alan hadn't known about Scott's infidelity and stood there frozen in shock. I took a deep breath and began to speak as calmly as I could.
Your behavior was so abnormal that I reached out to your first wife. What are you doing, going behind my back?
As Scott looked like he was about to lash out, the lawyer silenced him with a look. Once he confirmed that Scott had restrained himself and fallen silent, the lawyer prompted me to continue.
It turns out you were the one who cheated.
I presented a copy of the divorce agreement that Scott's ex-wife had given me, urging me to use it. It proved that Scott's infidelity was the cause of their divorce and that the matter had been settled with Scott at fault. When I met Scott, he had told me that he was the one who had been cheated on, but that was a blatant lie. Scott himself was the one who had cheated.
Your ex-wife told me I should have a detective investigate you right away. Of course, I did so without hesitation. And just as I thought, evidence of your affairs kept popping up one after another.
Saying that, I spread out the detective's investigation report on the table.
I'll offset the property division with the amount you took from me, so you'd better pay the compensation in full.
I glared at him as I said that, and Scott began to tremble, now resorting to begging for forgiveness.
I'm sorry, Carol. I let my guard down and got taken advantage of. I was seduced and had no choice. Please, forgive me. Come on now, hurry up and sign.
I'm busy. I looked down at Scott, who had begun to apologize profusely in an unseemly manner, without any emotion. Then Alan, comparing my coldly dismissive attitude with Scott's pathetic state, started trying to butter me up.
Carol, I'm different. I'm not like my crazy dad. I'm on your side. You're the only real family I have, Carol.
Alan! Even Scott, who had been begging for forgiveness, gaped at Alan in shock over his sudden change. Alan put on his best good boy act and tried to take my hand.
I'm still a child who needs parental protection, so I need your support, Carol.
I brushed off the hand he extended without hesitation. What's with this I'm still a child crap? It's so disgusting I might break out in hives. I put some distance between us again and conveyed my revulsion without hiding it.
You're already 18, right? You're a proper adult now, and your actions have consequences. You're smart enough to get into medical school on your first try, so shouldn't you be the one supporting your dad instead? Cut the crap!
Enraged by my words as I tried to protect myself, Scott, who had been groveling on the floor, and Alan, who had been trying to butter me up, finally resorted to violence and swung their fists at me. But their blows never reached me. My lawyer deliberately called the police in a loud voice so that the two agitated men would notice. Realizing the police were on their way, they frantically fled the law office. When the officers arrived just a few minutes later, my lawyer and I explained the situation. They concluded that I should absolutely avoid meeting with Scott and Alan directly from now on. From then on, all communication would be done through my lawyer. Knowing those two, I had thought the compensation claim would likely drag on. But it was settled sooner than I expected. As it turned out, Alan had apparently become a shut-in. You see, when Scott and Alan had caused that commotion in front of my office earlier, some rubbernecker had posted a video online of Alan verbally abusing me. It had blown up due to how terrible it was. Alan, who had been bragging about getting into medical school on his social media with his face visible, was quickly identified and apparently received some pretty awful direct messages. His pride shattered, Alan's spirit seemed to have broken. I heard through the grapevine that he had stopped coming out of his room. As for Scott, his reputation within the company had already hit rock bottom due to the divorce scandal. His demands for us to get back together and the police incident were the final nail in the coffin, and he was being treated like a pariah. His own motivation seemed to be at an all-time low, but with Alan shutting himself in, the debts from the money he had poured into gambling, and the compensation he had to pay me, he apparently couldn't even quit his job. Scott had been demoted from sales manager because of the disturbance he caused in front of our company, his client. Lacking the courage to change jobs in his late 40s, he seemed to be working on inertia. The new person in charge of our account was complaining about him with a give-me-a-break attitude.
This isn't something I should be telling you, Carol, but Scott's misogynistic remarks have become a social issue. But seriously, we're getting complaints from complete strangers. It seemed the new person in charge at the client company had quite a loose tongue. When he found out I was Scott's ex-wife, he started venting and telling me about Scott's current situation without me even asking. I considered requesting a change in who handled our account, not wanting to get involved with them anymore. But I figured it might be good to stay informed of the situation to avoid any weird ideas, so I left things as they were. Having finally overcome what might have been the greatest hardship of my life, I was now throwing myself into my work more than ever. I had built a good friendship with Scott's ex-wife since she cooperated with me, and it was nice that we could easily keep in touch as fellow single women. We were planning to go out for some delicious drinks together soon. Hey, what are you doing sleeping here? You're not seriously going to make me bring this, are you?
Looking over, I found my stepson Zach pointing at the lunch on the table. Zach, who's always particular about his food, checks the contents of the sandwich inside the lunchbox and which snack is packed with the sandwich. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a fever of 104 degrees. I've been tormented by a high fever since this morning but I stood up, reaching to put the sandwich in the lunchbox. However, Zach roughly brushed the sandwich aside with his hand.
Hey, why would you do that?
Though I was suffering from the fever, I raised my voice. Then, Zach's face suddenly flushed with anger and started to tremble. He grabbed the vase from the table and threw it at me with all his might.
Your dad's parasite, don't you dare slack off at home.
As Zach, my husband Ashton's son from his previous marriage, grew up, his attitude towards me worsened. But this was the first time he went this far. I staggered but managed to dodge the vase thrown by Zach. He must have been really upset to be scolded by me. I can't forgive him, but I'm too sick to deal with Zach right now. I feel like I could collapse at any moment because I'm feeling so unwell.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, I hear a shout from behind me. It's unmistakably Ashton's voice, and I thought the scolding was directed at me. I had told Ashton about feeling unwell last night. It's too much, just because lunch was only a simple sandwich. When I timidly turned around, there stood Ashton. Looking furious like never before, his shoulders shaking with anger. At Ashton's feet lay the shattered pieces of the vase thrown by Zach, wetting the floor. Zach looks at me with a serves you right expression upon Ashton's entrance. Just as Zach starts to smirk and opens his mouth, an unexpected word comes out of Ashton's mouth. My name is Tracy. I'm a 49-year-old housewife. I married my current husband Ashton when I was 42. It was my first marriage, but for Ashton, this was his second. I met Ashton at my previous job. I was doing clerical work at the company, and Ashton, who frequently visited as a salesman, became an acquaintance. I've always been shy around people, but as I talked with Ashton, who was serious and honest, I was drawn to his character. Ashton had a son from his previous marriage. I was surprised when I learned that such a serious person had been married before. Could it be that even for someone like him, a marriage could fail? That's what I initially thought, but after hearing the details from Ashton, I felt sympathy. Ashton's ex-wife was quite the partier, and the divorce was caused by her infidelity. Even though he knew about her bad habits during their relationship, Ashton believed they would change. However, no matter how hard Ashton tried, the outcome didn't change. Despite saying I won't do it again, his ex-wife cheated repeatedly. Even after their son was born, her bad habits didn't stop, and Ashton finally decided to divorce. He couldn't leave his son with such a mother, a tough decision indeed. Ashton dearly loved the son he had with his ex-wife, who he used to be deeply in love with. The son's name is Zach, and he's now 21 years old, attending college. Though there's no blood relation between me and him, he became my son when I married Ashton. I had been introduced to Zach several times during our dating period. The first time I met Zach, he was 10 years old. Since it was a very sensitive issue, Ashton and I took our time to talk to Zach about it. No matter how much we loved each other, if Zach rejected us, that would be it. Being a primary school student, it was difficult for him to understand everything. To be honest, it didn't seem like it was such an important matter to Zach. Without any rejection, Zach became my son. However, once we started living together, Zach's troubles became apparent. Ashton is a businessman working in sales at a major insurance company. He's serious by nature and has been raising Zach alone since his divorce from his ex-wife. While raising a child, he also managed to do his job well at the company, eventually becoming an executive. Ashton worked hard for Zach's sake, ensuring that Zach could live a life without experiencing any misfortune. But raising a child alone has its limits, even for a father. After work, it often got late, or I ended up leaving Zach alone. Though my parents-in-law live not too far away, Ashton, being the serious type, didn't like relying too much on them. That inevitably led to him being overly indulgent with Zach. He compensated for not being able to spend much time with him by buying him various things and spoiling him. Seeing this, Zach grew cunning. He knew that by acting good in front of Dad, he could get anything he wanted. He became increasingly adept at committing misdeeds without the adults around him noticing. That was precisely how he was acting when I first met Ashton. For Zach, my presence was nothing but an annoyance. He probably thought that having a new mother figure would take away his freedom. Yet, he didn't oppose our marriage because he saw me as an outlet for his stress. Even as a child, he exploited my delicate position. Before we were married, I was a guest, and Ashton prioritized me. But once married, we were family. Zach understood this too well, knowing that Ashton would put his blood-related son first. Whose words would Ashton believe first, mine or Zach's? Once the three of us started living together, Zach's attitude towards me changed drastically, and the harassment began. I was prepared for some rebellion from a boy in elementary school, but
since Dad's feeding you, it's only natural you take care of me, right? What I say goes, so get used to it.
the first time Zach said such abusive words to me, I was furious. Those aren't words a child should say to a parent, and it shouldn't be allowed.
Zach, do you understand what you just said? Even if it was a joke, there are things you shouldn't say. Think about why Mom is angry.
Zach listened to my words with a smirking face. Rather, he seemed to enjoy being scolded. It was eerie to see Zach smirking through my serious scolding. He understood his position as a stepson and how we might be seen by society. Having had little to do with children before, I was appalled by how cunning he was. I never imagined a child could say such things. That night, when Ashton came home, I told him about the incident with Zach. The unnaturally mature behavior, the abusive words towards me. I was nearly in a panic, but made sure to convey everything to Ashton. However, contrary to my feelings, Ashton's thoughts were exactly as Zach predicted.
Zach said that to you?
No way.
Aren't you exaggerating a bit? Zach isn't the kind of child to say such things.
Ashton didn't take my report seriously and refused to believe Zach's abusive words. No matter how much I insisted, Ashton's reaction didn't change. On the contrary, he was irritated by my persistence. Tracy just doesn't like Zach because he's not her real son, he implied without saying it outright, but it was apparent in his actions.
Let's drop this subject. You used to care so much about Zach before we got married. I'm disappointed in you.
Ashton said that inside deeply. I didn't want to hear such words from Ashton. Despite everything, I was seriously engaging with Zach. I no longer thought of him as someone else's child. But from Ashton's perspective, it seemed I was seen that way. Ashton's words crushed me. Saying any more would only worsen our relationship. I felt that and gave up on discussing about Zach any further. Zach, who had been watching secretly, grew confident from the situation. Dad really does believe in me, he concluded with deep conviction. Still, there were times when my patience ran out. If this continued, Zach would grow up to be a terrible adult. I was afraid of ruining my relationship with Ashton, but each time I scolded Zach and consulted Ashton. However, the result was always the same. I even directly asked Zach several times, but he dismissed it.
I would never say such a thing to Mom, right? It must be a misunderstanding or you misheard. Maybe Mom just feels that I'm in the way.
Zach exploited my position, using it to wedge himself into Ashton's affections. If things continue this way, Zach will keep having his way, and eventually, irreversible cracks will form in my relationship with Ashton. The parental instinct to do what's best for Zach started to be suppressed deep down. I tried to refrain from interfering in Zach's actions as much as possible, and even kept my emotions in check. I didn't want to resort to such thinking, but Zach would eventually leave this home, and I just had to endure until then. Perhaps, in time, his feelings towards me would change, and he might even apologize. In my daily interactions with Zach, I knew the likelihood of that happening was almost nil. However, I had no choice but to keep encouraging myself. And so, I continued to deceive myself, desperately enduring each day. It was around the time Zach was about to graduate from high school. Having been tutored by a top-notch instructor, Zach had secured admission to one of the most competitive universities in the state. Perhaps feeling relieved after securing his admission, he started to act even more arrogantly than before. That day, Ashton was away on a business trip that lasted several days, leaving the house empty. In the evening, after finishing the chores, I waited for Zach's return. With Ashton not around, We were supposed to have dinner together, so I prepared a proper menu as usual. However, Zach didn't return even after his usual time had passed. I hadn't heard anything, but maybe he was delayed by a class or something. Could something have happened? I sent a message to Zach's mobile phone, but there was no reply from him. Even past 8 p.m., with no contact from Zach, I didn't start dinner, waiting for him to return. About an hour later, I heard a noisy group outside the house. Feeling a bad premonition, I opened the front door, and there stood Zach, bringing along several boys and girls.
What? You're home? We're gonna have a party now, so can you leave?
Upon seeing my face, Zach clicked his tongue and said that. From behind, jeers like "When is it gonna start?" and "Hurry up" followed.
Leave! I was making dinner, waiting for you to come home.
I threw back at Zach, bewildered. It was unthinkable to allow a party with many university students at this hour.
Like I care! This is my house, so just get out of the way!
Zach yelled, pushing past me to enter the house. Following him, the group of boys and girls also started pouring into the house. Powerless, I could only watch the procession. Soon after, loud music began to play inside. And the students' clamor reached my ears. This would surely disturb the neighbors. I rushed through the students towards Zach, covering my ears.
Turn off the music now!
I shouted, trying not to be drowned out by the music. However, Zach deliberately ignored me, pretending not to hear. Overwhelmed by the students' fervor, I was helpless. I'm not sure how long it had been, but the sound of sirens began to mix with the loud music. Predictably, the sirens belonged to police officers, called by a neighbor's report. As the guardian, I received a stern warning, and Zach and his friends were ordered to disperse. I was just embarrassed and sorry for causing such a nuisance over something so trivial. While Zach had been meek in front of the officers, he started complaining to me once everyone had left.
Who called the cops? Seriously, so annoying.
The next day, when Ashton returned from his trip, I reported the incident and asked him to talk to Zach.
You're not a child anymore. Act with the awareness of an adult and live without shame.
Zach apologized to me sincerely after being lectured by Ashton. Later, Zach and Ashton went to apologize to the neighbors together. After receiving a good scolding from the neighbors, Zach returned home with tears in his eyes, seemingly having learned his lesson. I thought Zach had truly reflected and changed, but my hopes were soon dashed. One night, sometime after Zach started university, I was suddenly hit by a chill and measured my temperature with the thermometer. I had a slight fever. Although I had no symptoms of a cold, my body felt sluggish and my head wasn't clear. I told Ashton I would go to bed early, just to be safe, and went to sleep. The next morning, the alarm clock went off at 5 a.m. as usual so I could prepare Zach's lunch. Upon waking, I was hit by a severe headache, barely able to lift myself up. Somehow managing to get out of bed, I checked my temperature. 104 degrees, this was definitely bad. However, I felt I still had to prepare Zach's lunch. Clinging to tables and walls, I barely made it to the kitchen. In this condition, it was impossible to cook properly. Normally, I make everything from scratch, including sandwiches along with homemade scones and muffins. I usually pack some fruits as well. But today, I decided to just make a simple sandwich with some vegetables to keep the nutritional balance in mind. Despite the high fever, I desperately finished making Zach's lunch. Maybe it was the relief of finishing the lunch, but I fell asleep for a moment in the dining chair, only to be awakened by Zach's voice.
Hey, what are you doing sleeping here? You're not seriously going to make me bring this, are you?
Looking up, Zach was pointing at the sandwich on the table. Zach, who's always particular about his food, checks the contents of the sandwich inside the lunchbox and which snack is packed with the sandwich. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a fever of 104 degrees. I stood up, reaching to put the sandwich into the lunchbox. However, Zach roughly brushed off the sandwich on the table aside with his hand.
Hey, why would you do that?
Even with the fever, I raised my voice. Then, Zach's face suddenly turned red, and his body began to shake with anger. He grabbed a vase from the table and threw it at me with all his might.
Don't slack off on housework. You're nothing but Dad's parasite.
I staggered but managed to dodge the vase thrown by Zach. He must have been really upset to be scolded by me. I can't forgive him, but I'm too ill to deal with Zach right now. I feel like I could collapse at any moment because I'm feeling so unwell.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, I hear a shout from behind me. It was undoubtedly Ashton's voice, and I thought the scolding was directed at me. I had told Ashton I was feeling unwell last night. This is too much, just because I made a simple lunch. When I timidly turned around, there stood Ashton. Looking furious like never before, his shoulders shaking with anger. At Ashton's feet lay the shattered pieces of the vase thrown by Zach, wetting the floor. Zach looked at me with a serves you right expression upon Ashton's entrance. Just as Zach starts to smirk and opens his mouth, Ashton shouted again.
Zach, I'm talking about you.
Zach stopped in his tracks at Ashton's angry voice, unable to comprehend Ashton's reprimand.
Huh? What are you talking about? Dad.
Zach was visibly shaken, his body trembling. Looking as if he might cry, staggering towards me. You have a fever. Tracy, you should be resting. Ashton, still glaring at Zach, approached me and told me so. Unable to grasp the situation, I too stood frozen, unable to move. Then, Ashton gently placed his hand on my shoulder. Just leave this to me. I cautiously looked up at Ashton's face and slowly nodded. There was no sign of resentment or anger in his gaze. If anything, his eyes conveyed regret and apology. Supported by Ashton, I managed to sit down on a nearby chair. While I sat down with Ashton's help, Zach, unable to hide his disturbance, was mouthing words as if wanting to say something. Thank you. After seating me, Ashton began to ignore Zach and started cleaning up the broken vase pieces scattered on the floor. After gathering the shards, he carefully wiped the wet floor and picked up the flowers that were miserably scattered around. The flowers I had bought had their petals scattered from being thrown. Ashton carefully placed a few flowers into a cup filled with water. During this time, Zach was so overwhelmed by the somber atmosphere that he couldn't say anything. He seemed to understand what was coming next. As Ashton turned back to face Zach, his eyes were again filled with fierce anger.
You're no longer a child of this house. Do you understand what you've done to Mom?
Ashton muttered sternly while glaring at Zach. The kitchen fell silent, with Ashton's heavy words echoing.
Wait, Dad, what are you talking about? Stop with the bad jokes. They're not funny.
Sensing Ashton's intention, Zach, though panicking, tried to respond jokingly.
Pack your things and leave immediately.
Ignoring Zach's remarks, Ashton said this quietly before placing his hand on my shoulder in shock. Come on, lie down in bed. I nodded silently and then went to the bedroom with Ashton's support. As I lay down, Ashton covered me with a blanket. I'm sorry for everything up to now. I sensed he was looking down on you, but I never imagined he was acting like that behind my back. Tracy, you kept quiet for his sake, didn't you? Ashton's voice trembled as he repeated I'm sorry several times. After you rest a bit, we'll go to the hospital. Ashton was visibly shaken and disturbed, But after a while, he said this and left the room. The kind words from Ashton, whom I thought would blame me, filled my heart. It wasn't just Zach he loved, he had been loving me properly as well. Ashton was struggling in his own way, watching over me. Despite the severe fever making my body ache, the pain was forgotten as a glimmer of hope started to shine in my heart. After Ashton took me to the hospital, the diagnosis was a high fever due to overwork. I was told to rest easy for a while, and then I started recuperating at home. When we returned home, Zach was still walking around with a big bag, seemingly in disbelief. He continued packing while watching Ashton, but Ashton didn't even look at Zach. After a while, Zach seemed to give up and left the house. He had become a university student. He could take care of himself, but I never imagined it would come to this. Zach will probably seek refuge with his grandparents or friends and return home once things settled down. Ashton's anger was way past normal. However, he wouldn't abandon his beloved son. I had naively thought so, but Ashton's resolution was far firmer than I imagined. As expected, Zach fled to his grandparents' house. He lied to his grandparents, saying Mom kicked me out, and managed to win their sympathy.
Oh my! How terrible! I'll talk to Dad myself, so tell me everything that happened.
Zach, thrilled at deceiving his grandparents, planned to use this opportunity to frame me. He started claiming that he had been receiving terrible harassment from me, who was not his real mother, all along. He fabricated a story about throwing the vase in a panic to protect himself during this incident. Dad is misunderstanding, he pleaded with tears, winning his grandparents over to his side.
Poor thing! You can skip university today and just rest. Don't worry about Mom, I'll handle her properly.
Zach, satisfied that his plan was working, proudly snuggled into the prepared bed.
I'll play the role of a grandson who can't recover from the shock.
Zach believed this without a doubt. However, Zach was about to face a far worse hell. The next day, Zach wore a smug face as he left for the university, while his grandparents sent him off. He thought this might be his chance to get rid of me, the nuisance. He had been using everyone to his advantage so far, thinking it was about time. Everything seemed to be going according to his plans, but as the lecture started, his belief crumbled with a noise. Zach.
I received a notice of withdrawal from the university by your dad yesterday.
The instructor, recognizing Zach, said this with a troubled look. The room started buzzing at those words.
What? What do you mean? That can't be right. Must be some mistake.
With Zach's desperate plea, the instructor said he would check and left the classroom. Zach tried to respond confidently to the gazes from around him.
Don't worry, it's gonna be fine. The teacher must have confused me with someone else. Making a fuss over nothing.
Yet, a bad premonition ran through Zach's mind. No way, he wouldn't go that far. When the instructor returned, he told Zach straightforward.
There's no mistake. Zach, your withdrawal has been processed.
With the instructor's words, the room buzzed even more, and Zach was engulfed in despair. Filled with embarrassment, Zach's face turned red, and he dashed out of the classroom.
This can't be happening. What's going on?
Racing down the long corridor, Zach muttered complaints under his breath. Why dominated his thoughts, slipping out unintentionally. He pulled out his mobile phone to call Ashton. However, Ashton had blocked his calls, leaving Zach unable to connect. Panicked, Zach hurried towards his grandparents' house. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the sight of his bag thrown in front of the entrance.
What is this?
Zach's panic intensified as he rang the doorbell. Seeing no response, he desperately banged on the front door.
Grandma! Grandpa!
He pleaded with tears in his voice, but there was no answer from inside. In that moment, Zach realized he had been betrayed by his grandparents. With nowhere else to go, Zach grabbed his discarded bag and headed home, hoping for some mistake, but the reality of the situation was clear. Sobbing, Zach rang the doorbell upon his return, and I was there to greet him.
What's happening? I was wrong. Please help me.
I led in Zach, who was sobbing. And he continued to cry even louder, perhaps feeling relieved. As planned, I took Zach to the room where Ashton was waiting. Zach remained inconsolable in front of Ashton, who watched silently, waiting for the crying to stop. Eventually realizing this, Zach ceased his tears. Once Zach had stopped, Ashton, still stern, finally spoke.
What do you intend to do by coming here now?
With those words, Zach was filled with despair again. He wasn't forgiven. There was no return to this home.
You should know, Grandma and Grandpa won't let you in anymore either,
I said, adding insult to injury. The plan had always been to welcome Zach if he fled to them, then to turn him away. This shock was greater than an outright rejection. It was retaliation for Zach, who had pretended to repent but betrayed my trust. He was to experience firsthand what I had endured.
There's no plan to revoke your university expulsion. If you want to continue, figure out the tuition yourself.
The expulsion was Ashton's decision, not something I had considered. It was to ensure Zach faced the consequences of his actions.
Before marrying Tracy, I might have made you feel neglected. That's why I prioritized you over her. You were always good in front of me, and I believed you were repentant for your mistakes.
Despite knowing better, Ashton had indulged Zach excessively, feeling sorry for him losing his mother and trying to compensate. But Zach's continuous disrespect and the vase-throwing incident were the last straw for Ashton. In a way, Ashton blamed his own upbringing for Zach's repulsive character. Unable to forgive the years of suffering Zach had caused me, Ashton had no choice but to believe in the harsh reality. Taking everything from Zach and casting him aside was also a punishment for Ashton himself.
So, I can't get help from you anymore? I can't make it on my own.
Zach pleaded tearfully, but Ashton's mind was made up. As a small mercy, Ashton handed Zach a month's worth of living expenses. In this limited time, Zach had no choice but to fend for himself. For Zach, who had been coddled and used to getting his way, this was hell. Being expelled from university meant he was off the promised elite path. Cut off from his parents and grandparents, he had to navigate life alone. The grandparents had always doted on Zach, their grandson. But after Ashton revealed Zach's numerous transgressions against me, their perspective shifted. No matter how beloved, some actions are unforgivable. At first, the word disownment seemed to baffle them a bit. But with Ashton's firm resolve and considering Zach's own situation, they cooperated. That very day, Zach rented a room in an old, dingy apartment where he could afford with the little money he had. The bath and toilet were shared, and the room was covered with thin, grimy walls. If he ever made noise with a large group of friends like before, he would be kicked out immediately. Staring at the little money he had left, Zach shed tears. He had lost his home and his family. His friends, who had always enjoyed Zach's generosity, were gone, having only used him. Zach, always unreasonable and lacking common sense, had kept his friends around with money. Now without any support, his future was bleak. He had never worked part-time before, relying on his parents for all his social expenses. Could someone as spoiled as him even manage to work? To survive, he had to find even the most grueling jobs. Thinking about this, Zach couldn't stop the tears from flowing. A year had passed since Zach left our home. Ashton started to put me first again, like when we first met. For about 10 years, everything had revolved around Zach, so we were reclaiming our relationship. I no longer had to ponder over Zach, allowing me to purely enjoy my relationship with Ashton. I'm truly sorry for all the hardship I've caused. I became blinded by my love for my son. I had never voiced it, but whenever Ashton criticized my statements about Zach, I would become physically ill from the stress. Being attacked on the point of having no blood relation felt like exploiting a vulnerability. Legally, he was my son, but that was one aspect I couldn't change. I felt devastated, as if being targeted for an unavoidable weakness. Now, Ashton and I can talk about it because Ashton himself always had this sensitive issue in the back of his mind. Not in a bad way, but he had decided never to mention it to me. Knowing how much it troubled me, Ashton began apologizing whenever possible. Zach's departure seemed to have freed us from various entanglements. Whether he knew it or not, Zach started sending letters periodically. They weren't about wanting to mend our relationship, but rather updating us on his situation. Perhaps it was his way of apologizing. Since that day, he has been desperately looking for work, sustaining his days through manual labor. Although Ashton says nothing, he seems somewhat relieved by these letters. We won't reach out anymore, but it's eased our minds. It's difficult for us to have children at our age, but it seems we can live harmoniously as a couple. There were more hardships than happiness, making everyday survival a challenge. But now, I can walk through my life, a bright and joyful one.
Risa, while you were away, I moved my parents' stuff into our house. What? What do you mean by that?
While I was on a trip, my husband Polly had moved his parents' moving boxes into our house without asking. And on top of that, I received unbelievable treatment from Polly. You should not come back anymore. Polly doesn't want me to come back home anymore. Even though this house is where our family has always lived, Polly wants to kick me out and live with his parents. However, I had anticipated being kicked out by Polly and easily retorted, "Okay, I'll move out on my own." I sought advice from my dad, Mike, and took a certain action. First, I sent an email to someone and made a plan. I returned to America with Mike. And then, I came back to our house. I started to execute the plan as intended. Polly, who had been naively thinking he could live with his parents, was surprised by the unexpected turn of events. Actually, the plan I had made with Mike was: my name is Risa. I am a 45-year-old dietitian working in a hospital. Originally, I was supposed to follow in Mike's footsteps, but inheriting my mom's love for cooking, I became a dietitian. However, my beloved mom passed away before I graduated from college. After that, Mike started working in France, so we sold the house I was born and raised in, and I started living alone in an apartment. Being plain-looking since childhood, I've always been inconspicuous wherever I go. Moreover, attending girls' schools from middle school to university, I had no encounters with men, and I had never had a boyfriend. However, I was fortunate to meet good people wherever I went, and after graduating from college, I got married. At that friend's wedding, I met my current husband, Polly, who was 3 years older than me and a friend of the groom. He seemed like the type who would be popular with the ladies. Luckily, or perhaps coincidentally, he had just broken up with his girlfriend. His ex-girlfriend was a nurse, and it seems they broke up due to misaligned schedules and night shifts. When I mentioned that I was a dietitian with early mornings and few holidays, he was very pleased. However, at that time, I was busy studying for the national exam for registered dietitians, so I was busy on weekends. Even so, he was kind enough to send me messages, saying, "I miss not being able to see you, but good luck with your studies. Feeling a sense of destiny with him, I thought I'd like to marry him if I passed. And on the day of the exam results, he invited me out to celebrate my passing that night.
Congratulations on passing.
This is how I feel, would you accept it? What he handed me was an engagement ring. He proposed to me right then and there. Overjoyed as if my passing was his own, I tearfully said yes right away. And so, our married life began. At first, we thought about living in an apartment, but with Mike's help, we bought our own home. I was looking forward to a happy life from now on, but after getting married, I started to feel a sense of discomfort around Polly. Thinking it was because I had no experience with men, I assumed it would be okay once I got used to it. However, one day, when Polly was looking at my pay stub, he made a comment that made me do a double take. "What's this?" I thought dietitians, being professionals, would earn more. I'm disappointed. What? Well, I just started working, and we're both working, so an income of around $200,000 should be fine, right? I retorted, feeling somewhat offended. It's not like I got married to be supported by my husband, but being told my salary was low didn't feel good. Yet, Polly went on to insult my earnings further. I've been totally deceived. If I knew the income was this low, I would have asked before getting married. A nurse would have earned more. Polly must have been talking about his ex-girlfriend. It's one thing to complain about my earnings, but comparing me to his ex-girlfriend is unforgivable. Indeed, nurses receive night shift allowances and holiday pay. In comparison, my salary is lower because I have fewer early mornings and holiday shifts. However, I have my own side of the story to tell. I happened to see Polly's pay stub the other day, and it turns out he earns even less than I do. Yet, I thought we wouldn't struggle with our combined incomes, so I didn't say anything. I tried to gently break it to Polly, not wanting to hurt his pride. "Well, it seems like you have it tough too, so I guess you were hoping for a bit more from my salary. Sorry for not meeting your expectations." That's right. I work for a small company, and my salary is really low, so I wanted to marry a professional woman to achieve financial stability. I only meant to cheer him up with what I didn't even believe myself, but I never thought Polly would take it seriously. Before we got married, he was happy that my work hours were regular, but after we got married, he complained about my low income as if he had changed his stance. What kind of world does a man live in where he expects his wife's income to be higher than his? I was just dumbfounded by Polly's unreliable behavior. As soon as he knew about my income, Polly started looking down on me. Yet, he wouldn't hesitate to buy whatever he wanted without restraint. Even when I asked him to be a bit more frugal, he wouldn't listen at all.
I've been spoiled by my parents since I was a kid, buying me whatever I wanted, so I can't change my attitude towards money that easily.
I couldn't say anything back to such a spoiled statement from Polly. It's no excuse to say that he was spoiled by his parents when he was a child at his age. The following year after we got married, we were blessed with a boy. I hoped that becoming a parent would change Polly, but his habit of spending recklessly didn't improve, even during childcare. It was always the same with him spending his entire salary. If it wasn't enough, he'd sneak money from my wallet without me noticing. While I was struggling to manage work and budgeting while raising our son, Cedric, Polly hardly contributed to childcare. As time passed, struggling through these tough days, Cedric is now preparing for his college entrance exams this year. Thanks to my careful budgeting, it looks like we can afford to send him to college. Cedric, understanding our financial situation, has been studying hard to enter a national university. Yet, Polly came up with a ridiculous idea. Because I bought a new car last year, the loan repayments are tough. Plus, there's Cedric's exams, right? So, I've decided to sell my parents' house and have them move in with us.
Wait, what are you saying? Suddenly living together like that, it's going to be a problem.
Why?
Risa, you get along with my parents, right? If we live together, we'll get their pension and become wealthier.
Indeed, I don't hate the idea of living with my in-laws. It's just that I didn't like Polly's way of making decisions on his own. In terms of finances, we've been managing wealth so far, so there shouldn't be a problem as long as we don't indulge in luxuries.
Why do you always decide everything selfishly? Even the new car, you bought it without consulting me. That's my car, so I don't need to consult you every time.
Seeing Polly's selfish behavior, this time, Cedric got furious.
Dad, enough is enough. When I go to college, I might come home late from part-time jobs or clubs. If grandparents Arnold and Rothy are living with us, it's going to be awkward, right? Why don't you discuss these things properly with Mom?
Cedric, coming out of his room all of a sudden and raising his voice, left Polly wide-eyed in surprise. But the next moment, Polly turned to me, lashing out as if he was taking it out on me.
Cedric talking back to me, his dad, like that is because of your poor parenting. Reflect on it.
Saying that, Polly locked himself in his room and didn't come out for a while. I was happy that Cedric stood up for me. However, I was worried that the current home environment would affect his exam preparations. Despite my worries, Cedric successfully passed his first-choice national university. But tired of living with Polly, Cedric decided to move out and start living on his own. He said he wants to try his best on his own without relying on his parents, even if it means working part-time. Even so, Polly continues to ignore both me and Cedric. Ever since it's been just Polly and me at home, we don't even talk though we're in the same house. It feels suffocating. During these days, feeling mentally drained, I called my dad Mike in France to seek advice. Mike, worried about me, suggested I come to France for a while. I thought I couldn't take a long break because of my job, but it seems my colleagues were worried about my pale complexion recently. After explaining the situation, I was allowed to take some time off. However, I wanted to keep my consultation with Mike a secret from Polly. So, I told him I was invited on a trip by a friend. I hoped that if I was away for a while, Polly might cool down a bit. But heading to Mike's, an entirely unexpected situation unfolded. Starting with a call from Polly while I was in France.
Risa, I've moved my parents' stuff into our house while you were away. What? What do you mean?
What do you mean, what?
I've been saying, haven't I? That I'd live with my parents. More than that, Dad and Mom are angry with you. They said a wife who spoils their son like you is the worst.
No way. I couldn't believe what Polly was saying. My in-laws shouldn't be the type to speak ill of me like that.
So, I've decided we'll live with my parents and me from now on. If you were here, it'd inconvenience my parents. After all, you're the strict wife who makes their son speak ill of them.
Polly must have badmouthed me to my in-laws. Maybe the part about them being angry with me was also a fabrication. Angry, I thought about shouting something back. But, to stay calm, I just said,
"I'll call you back later,"
and hung up. Luckily, Mike was home, so I immediately shared the phone call's content with him. Mike, looking disgruntled, shook his head.
Polly, really? Relying on his parents at his age. That's what I'm saying. I don't understand why I have to be the one kicked out.
After a long discussion, Mike came up with a suggestion that excited me. I thought this would teach Polly a lesson. First, I contacted someone by email, then called Polly's mobile phone.
Polly, talking over the phone won't cut it, so let's discuss this when I get back from my trip.
I said this calmly, but Polly, with a laugh in his voice, replied, "You shouldn't come back." Just as Mike advised, Polly didn't want me to return home. Expecting this, I retorted easily,
"Okay, got it. I'll just move out on my own."
"Huh?" Polly sounded taken aback by my unexpected response. But thinking I was just bluffing, he laughed and replied,
"Move out? Where to, when you have nowhere to go?"
"Oh, to the place I'm currently at."
"What are you talking about? You're on a trip with friends. Wait, you're not with a man, are you?"
Now he seemed to misunderstand that I was with a lover, so I decided to reveal the truth. "Well, if it's a man, it's indeed a man. But, you know, it's Dad."
Mike's place."
Polly sounded relieved. But he'd be surprised by the next part of the conversation. "Dad's living in a mansion in France now, so I've decided to live here too. That's why we're going to sell the house we've been living in."
"What? What do you mean?"
"Well, you should know, right? That house is in Dad's name, built for us. If I'm not living there, it's to be sold."
"What? But Dad and Mom are here right now. What are you going to do?"
That's what I said.
It's no use talking over the phone.
Polly, finally grasping the situation, hung up without saying anything else. He can't possibly imagine the further tragedy waiting for him upon my return to America. A week later, I returned home with Mike, where Polly was living with my in-laws. At the entrance, my in-laws greeted us with smiles. "Mike, it's been a long time."
"Yes, I can't often return to America due to work. Risa has always been under your care."
While Mike and my father-in-law Arnold were exchanging greetings, Polly quietly emerged. It seemed he hadn't yet informed them about the house sale. Looking awkward, Polly just bowed his head.
"Polly, the movers are coming today to pick up the stuff. Have you prepared everything?"
"All your stuff is already packed." "Oh, it's not just my things that are being moved out."
"Huh? Do I have to move my things out today, too?"
Polly's surprised shout caught Arnold's attention. "What's going on, Polly? Why are your things being moved out?" Polly, looking guilty, hesitantly explained the situation. Arnold became furious and started yelling at Polly.
"You said this house was bought under your name with a loan so we could live together. Making your parents ashamed, unforgivable."
Arnold's thunderous voice left Polly speechless. Then, the moving truck arrived. After my things were moved out, my mother-in-law Rothy came out to direct the movers.
"Thank you for your hard work. Our stuff is prepared here, please take it."
Rothy had neatly prepared all the household items, including Polly's. Seeing this, Polly was dumbfounded.
"Mom? What's happening? Why are you packing Dad's stuff too? Where are you planning to take it?"
Watching Polly panic and question Rothy, we all burst into laughter.
"You've been completely fooled." "What? What's going on? Why is everyone laughing all of a sudden?"
Indeed, this was all a plan to trick Polly, discussed in advance by everyone here. The first person I contacted by email from France was Rothy. Rothy had been worried about my tired appearance for some time. After repeatedly asking why, I ended up telling Rothy everything about Polly. Rothy was shocked, especially at the part where Polly blamed his extravagant habits on his parents spoiling him. Rothy tearfully apologized for her parenting in front of me, which made me feel guilty. But Polly's wasteful spending wasn't Rothy's fault. As I comforted Rothy, our bond deepened. For me, without a mom, Rothy became someone I could consult about anything. Mike was aware of my close relationship with Rothy. Thus, he suggested involving the in-laws in our plan. Rothy, without letting Polly know, had been looking for a new place for them to live with Arnold. Arnold's scolding of Polly was all an act. I nearly burst out laughing at their convincing performance.
Rothy, thank you for arranging the movers for me as well. Now, I can move to the house Dad built in France.
I'm sorry, Risa.
My son has caused you so much trouble.
Rothy, we agreed not to say that, didn't we? Rothy and I laughed together. Polly, unaware of how close I was with his parents, looked surprised.
Mom, where are we moving to? We've already sold our family home.
We've already arranged a new place for us. Polly seemed relieved at Rothy's words. But that relief would soon be short-lived.
So, it was like that. I worried for nothing. Then I'll just go there too, right?
What are you talking about?
That's a senior living apartment for Arnold to live in with someone else. Polly, you're not a child anymore. Find your own place to live.
As soon as Rothy said this, Polly's face turned pale.
That's impossible. I don't even have the money for moving, let alone find a new place.
Indeed, Polly had squandered his salary on hobbies and entertainment, leaving him with no savings. No matter how he struggled now, it was his own responsibility. Desperate, Polly looked at me with pleading eyes. I could guess what he was about to say.
By the way, Mike built quite a big house in France, right? I had no idea you were such a well-off lady. Listen, I'll do anything you say from now on, so could you take me with you to that house?
Suddenly speaking in a sweet tone, he was indeed trying to rely on me. I had no intention of indulging such naive thoughts and firmly stated my position.
I've been fooled by your kind words on occasion, but I can't forgive you anymore. You've barely contributed to our living expenses and have just been playing around. I don't want to be your wife anymore. I've already discussed this with Cedric on the phone yesterday, and we've decided to get a divorce. Cedric agrees it's for the best.
I vented the feelings I had been holding back, feeling a sense of relief. My in-laws seemed to agree, nodding deeply.
What am I supposed to do now?
Polly cried, tears in his eyes, but my decision was firm. I presented him with the divorce papers and demanded his signature. Yet, Polly stubbornly refused to sign. Seeing this, Arnold showed his anger again.
Polly, enough is enough. After all the trouble you've caused Risa, now you're thinking of relying on her parents' home. I'm ashamed to call you my son. That's right. I admit, I've spoiled you too much. But Polly, you're an adult now. Stop being so selfish and start living on your own.
Convinced by his parents' earnest persuasion, Polly shed tears.
What? Even Dad and Mom? Do I have no allies here?
Muttering so, Polly signed the divorce papers. He then arranged to store his belongings in a storage unit and left the house alone. Betrayed by the parents he thought were on his side, he was visibly shocked. However, the in-laws had decided to cut ties with Polly. Not just them. I also promised never to let Polly see Cedric again. This was a strong request from Cedric. He had always resented Polly for never acting like a father. With the divorce as an opportunity, Cedric wanted to sever ties with Polly. I thought it was for the best for Cedric. Rejected by his parents and disowned by his son, Polly must have lost the will to live. Having lost everything, Polly spent some time living in monthly rental hotels and internet cafes. But once he received his salary, he managed to move into an apartment where he could live alone. During the divorce, I gave Polly a small amount of money as part of our shared assets. It was practically nothing, but I wanted to avoid any future claims for money, given my financial situation. In essence, it was severance pay. However, once Polly had a bit of financial leeway, he started getting into partying. Why do I know this? Because Polly contacted me, saying,
"I'll find a woman with a good income and make you regret leaving me."
Initially, after becoming alone, Polly would contact me just to express his loneliness. But once he had money, his attitude became arrogant again. After some time, the communications from Polly suddenly stopped. I wondered if he had found a new girlfriend, but it turned out the situation was far more serious. According to the former in-laws, Polly had fallen for a nurse he met at a party. Despite not being reciprocated, Polly persistently pursued her. At worst, he even showed up at her apartment. As a result of his relentless stalking, he was reported and arrested in the act. The former in-laws, having intended to sever parental ties, were troubled by their son's scandal, feeling deeply sorry for them. Being a parent is tough. No matter how much you try to distance yourself, you're still responsible when something happens. Despite causing so much trouble for his parents, Polly seemed unrepentant. During the interrogation,
"It was true love,"
he kept insisting. This led to a judgment that he was not remorseful, and his release was delayed. Such a man is better off cooling his head in prison for a while. After all, a penniless man in his 50s chasing such ideals will only cause annoyance. Now, I live elegantly in a mansion in France with Mike. Still not accustomed to the environment and not fluent in French, I'm not working yet. However, I can't stay unemployed forever, so I'm attending French lessons. Once I'm proficient in the language, I plan to help out with Mike's company. As time passed, Cedric graduated from university. He then moved here to work at Mike's company. In fact, Mike had called him over with the intention of making Cedric his successor. It was lonely being apart from Cedric for 4 years, but now we can live together forever. This thought fills me with joy. Now that I've become quite fluent in French, I assist with Mike's company and work as a cooking class instructor locally. Though my marriage failed, my life in France is very fulfilling. Despite being in my mid-40s, this is an ideal environment to enjoy life. I've decided to forget my past self, who worried about being plain and unpopular, and live positively. After all, there's still so much more to come. Surely, Mom in heaven is watching over me.
"Hello. Hope we're not disturbing."
Suddenly, the living room door opened, and in came my husband's colleague, Miller. Following him, about 4 others entered one after another, with my husband, Kevin, trailing behind them with a crude smile.
Sorry, but what's going on here?"
"Today's a barbecue with friends.
"Hurry up and buy some meat and beer."
Kevin, who had established a habit of talking down to me, said this to me. It seems like birds of a feather flocked together, as Kevin's friends were also directing crude smiles our way. I was furious.
"I'm actually about to go on a trip, so that's not possible."
"What?" Kevin's face filled with anger, as if embarrassed in front of his friends. Normally, I would panic and comply upon seeing that look on his face, but now, completely out of patience, I couldn't care less about Kevin's mood.
"Just make sure you're careful with fire, okay?" "Hey!"
I ignored them all and left the house. However, a few hours later, I received a call while on my trip that my husband had been taken into police custody. What on earth did he do? My name is Isabella. I'm a 48-year-old civil servant. My parents died in a car accident when I was in college. I live in the house they left me, and I graduated college with the help of insurance money and scholarships. I was lucky enough to become a civil servant, and though living alone was lonely, it was stable. The administration I worked for was far from the house I lived in, so I rented out the house I lived in with my parents and rented a studio near my workplace for myself. I rented out the house as is, but it quickly found a tenant because of its good location. The person who rented the house was very kind, and knowing my circumstances, told me I could come over any time. Thanks to the rental income and my civil servant salary, I was living a more stable life than others my age. Around that time, visiting tourist spots became my hobby. There's a unique atmosphere everywhere, somehow reassuring yet making me tense, and I loved it. I met my husband, Kevin, at a book club for working adults that a friend invited me to. I was instantly drawn to the quiet and kind Kevin. Perhaps sensing that, Kevin actively pursued me, leading the way in our relationship, which was difficult for me to navigate. After dating for 2 years, he proposed on my 29th birthday, and we got married. The following year, our daughter, Evelyn, was born, and we were very happy. However, that's when Kevin's true nature began to show. Since I was working, we had agreed to share household chores. Kevin had kept to this agreement until I went on maternity leave, but as soon as I started my leave, he began going out to drink more often and completely stopped doing any household chores as soon as I took parental leave.
Hey, the dishes are your job, right? Please. What? You've been lazing around all day at home and you're giving orders? You should do it,
Kevin said, and quickly prepared to go out. After Evelyn was born, he would go out to drink about 4 times a week on his own, not caring at all for Evelyn. Juggling childcare and household chores while suffering from sleep deprivation due to night feedings was extremely hard. But complaining to Kevin didn't help. He didn't understand at all and would insult me by saying I was inefficient. Continuing this life made my love for Kevin fade, and by the time Evelyn was 5, I saw him merely as a roommate. Fortunately, I didn't have to work overtime or on weekends and holidays. This allowed me to spend a lot of time with Evelyn. Although Evelyn was a handful with her night crying and frequent feedings as a baby, by the age of 6, she had become a very mature child. She was clingy when it was just the 2 of us, but she also took the initiative to help around the house and always said thank you for each little thing. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that watching Evelyn grow was my only joy, and I adored her. However, Kevin was not involved with Evelyn, only occasionally approaching her when he was in a good mood. By then, his true colors were fully shown, not doing household chores, not participating in child-rearing, and going out to drink almost daily, coming home smelling of women's perfume. But I had grown so indifferent to Kevin that I didn't care anymore. Even so, the reason I didn't choose divorce was to not make life difficult for Evelyn. Honestly, with the rental income from my parents' house and my salary, I could easily afford to send her to college. But I didn't want to burden Evelyn if I became unable to work. Fortunately, Kevin seemed to be competent at his job, and even though it was a small to mid-sized company, he earned more than I did. Thus, I had come to view him as the person who would earn the money for Evelyn's education and our living expenses. However, around the time Evelyn entered high school, Kevin's spending got worse. I had always let him spend freely on anything other than Evelyn's tuition and living expenses, but then the school contacted me saying the tuition payment had not gone through. I hurriedly transferred the money from my own account to avoid trouble, but this made me realize there was no benefit to staying married and not divorcing. Thinking this, I approached Kevin, who was about to go out and was looking at himself in the mirror in the bathroom.
Hey, the school called saying Evelyn's tuition payment didn't go through.
Huh, so?
So? What do you mean so? You were supposed to pay for it. That kid has been kind of rude lately. Always glaring at me. That's because she's going through adolescence, isn't it?
I felt a headache coming on. Kevin himself must have gone through a rebellious phase. Yet he refuses to take an interest in his own daughter's growth and uses her being rebellious as an excuse not to pay for her tuition, which is just the lowest, not just as a dad but as a person. At this moment, I decided to divorce Kevin once Evelyn started college. And until then, I resolved to act like a compliant wife. As I was thinking this, Kevin looked at me with a smug smile.
What? You know, I hardly ever come home, and do I really need to contribute to the living expenses? So, how about this? I'll pay for that kid's school fees instead of giving you living expenses.
Fine. My recently made resolution was already being tested, but I managed to hold firm. Not contributing to the living expenses was unthinkable. But not having Evelyn's tuition paid would be a bigger problem, so I reluctantly agreed. And the money that used to go to living expenses now became Kevin's pocket money, making his lifestyle even more extravagant. One day, as I was walking through the entertainment district on my way home from work, I spotted Kevin with his arm wrapped around the shoulder of a man I recognized. Kevin hadn't noticed me, but the man next to him did and came over. "If it isn't Isabella. What are you doing here?"
Well,
I think I met him at our wedding, but he wasn't introduced, so I didn't know his name. And despite the distance, he already smelled strongly of alcohol. How long had they been drinking? I managed to suppress my urge to grimace and put on a smile.
oh, I'm Miller. Kevin and I were in the same club at college. By the way, Isabella, you're really beautiful. How about one night with me? Just kidding.
Hey. If you want a middle-aged woman like this, I'll give her to you. More than Miller's frivolous words, I was shocked by Kevin's words. Even if he was drunk, those were not words to be uttered in front of his wife.
Really? Maybe I'll book a hotel next time then.
I'll pass. I'm in a hurry, so I'll be going. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly left the scene. I could hear Miller and Kevin saying something behind me, but I ignored it all. That night, Kevin, who seemed to have come home in the middle of the night, didn't even remember seeing me the next morning. When I asked about Miller, Kevin bragged about how he had started some profitable business recently and that he had gone to hear about it yesterday.
Don't come begging for money when I become rich, okay?
I responded lightly to his buoyant words. As long as Evelyn's tuition was paid, I had no expectations from Kevin anymore. However, a decisive incident would occur a little after Evelyn started college. It happened on the day I was planning to take a solo trip, intending to use up my accumulated paid leave. After gathering everything at the entrance, I took a break. Kevin had left in a happy mood that morning, so I had sent him a message just in case. He had read it, so I felt I had done my duty, and I sipped my tea. Then there was a sound from the entrance, and I thought Kevin had come back unusually early, but the person who came through the door made me almost spit out my tea.
Hello. Hope we're not disturbing.
Suddenly, Miller walked in through the living room door, followed by about 4 others.
Sorry, what's going on here? I'm having a barbecue with some friends. Hurry up and buy some meat and beer.
Just like Kevin, who was laughing, his friends were also giving me crude smiles. I was furious.
I'm about to go on a trip, so that's not possible. What?
Kevin's face filled with anger as if he was embarrassed in front of his friends. Normally, I would have panicked and complied upon seeing his face, but now, completely fed up, I had no interest in Kevin's mood.
Just be careful with fire, okay? Hey!
I ignored them all and left the house. However, a few hours later, I received a call while on my trip that my husband had been taken into police custody. What on earth did he do? The call from the police was for identification, and they said I didn't need to come to the station right away. Apparently, they asked Kevin if he could prepare clothes for staying in the detention center because the interrogation might take a while, and he gave them my name and contact details.
We could lend some and bill you later. Oh, that's fine. Please make him pay for it. Understood. We'll contact you if there's anything else. Yes, please do. It seems the reason for being taken into police custody was attempting to forcibly bring a woman who was walking outside while drunk into his home. It was a red-handed arrest, and there was no room for excuses, and he would likely be charged. Miller was facing other charges, and there was a possibility that Kevin was involved as well. Hearing that, I sat down on the spot. It was good that I had arrived at my destination. I cried. Then, coffee was placed on the table in front of me. Mom, are you okay? What happened? Actually, the place I was traveling to was the area where Evelyn's university is located, and I was going to stay at Evelyn's place during my trip. The call from the police came just as I was about to take a break after arriving at Evelyn's place. Dad's been arrested by the police. The reason is a bit. It's okay. Tell me when you've calmed down. Hey, Mom, maybe you should seriously consider divorce. You've been enduring for my sake, right? I ranked first in my class this time. I got a scholarship with no repayment obligation, my professor told me. So, I'll be fine. Evelyn. You're right. Evelyn's words made up my mind. As a parent, I felt unreliable for making my daughter say this, but at the same time, I was very happy that Evelyn had grown up to be so kind and splendid. A few days later, I received a call from the police that only Kevin had been released. It seemed Kevin claimed to be a victim, unaware that Miller's business involved criminal activity. In fact, it was proven that Kevin knew nothing, and he was declared innocent, which disappointed me internally. The day after the police contacted me, Kevin called me. I didn't want to answer the phone, but thinking about what comes next, I decided to answer. Hello? Ah, you picked up. Where the hell are you? At Evelyn's place. When I said that, Kevin seemed to think for a moment. But eventually, he didn't come up with an answer and quickly raised his voice. I don't know where that kid lives. Just come back home. The housework is piling up. Sorry, but I'm not coming back. What? My firm refusal seemed to surprise Kevin, and he was momentarily speechless. I repeated slowly to the silence on the other end of the phone. I'm not coming back. Please, let's get a divorce. Do you even know what you're saying? Kevin managed to squeeze out some words. I didn't respond to him. Then, simultaneously, I heard the sound of a mobile phone being dropped on the other end. He must have been quite shocked. I delivered the final blow. Let's discuss the rest through a lawyer. I'll have my lawyer contact you later. Wait, hey! Isabella! Kevin was calling my name, but I hung up without a care. Then, I contacted the lawyer I had just hired yesterday. It seemed the lawyer had reached out to Kevin immediately, as I received multiple calls from Kevin, all of which I ignored. I then contacted my workplace. I had already been considering early retirement, but I took this as an opportunity to resign and decided to live near Evelyn. Fortunately, I had an inheritance left by my parents and a steady income from renting out my family home. Additionally, I would receive a severance package, so living on my own wouldn't be an issue. Since it would take about 2 months to finalize my resignation, I rented a short-term apartment near my workplace to wrap up my job. I commuted from there and completed the handovers and other work. During this time, Kevin called me multiple times, but I had my lawyer handle all communications. Kevin was adamant about not wanting a divorce, and despite hearing how much he had hurt me, I didn't do it. It's all a misunderstanding. He kept insisting. Reluctantly, I agreed to a meeting. It was challenging to even set a date,
but 3 weeks after proposing the meeting, we finally scheduled it, and I prepared myself for a major confrontation. On the day of the meeting, the person who showed up at the meeting place was a completely sullen middle-aged man.
I'm not going to divorce. I was just deceived. I'm not at fault. Let's sit down and talk about it.
I responded dispassionately to Kevin's remarks and entered the restaurant ahead of him. The high-end restaurant, designed with separate rooms for each table, was where Kevin and I had celebrated our engagement with a meal.
Do you remember this place? Huh?
Kevin's response extinguished the last bit of sentiment I had left. Even after everything, we were once committed to spending a lifetime together. I had hoped that remembering this place might lead to a more amicable discussion, but my consideration was in vain.
Let's start the discussion.
At my cue, the lawyer beside me took out several documents. They contained evidence of Kevin's actions and infidelity, as well as details about the dubious business he was involved in with Miller. Kevin looked over them with annoyance, then sighed.
If you have complaints, say them directly. Sneaky woman. These are not complaints, but facts needed for our discussion.
Kevin seemed to become even more irritated upon hearing this. Still, I was unwavering. However, when a new document was presented, Kevin's complexion changed.
Hey, this is...
Oh, didn't you know? The document included a photo of a woman in a wedding dress and her husband, smiling happily. Kevin paled at the sight of the two.
The woman you're currently having an affair with, she's your boss's wife, right? No way!
Kevin, apparently unaware, looked utterly panicked. His earlier defiance had vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Investigations revealed that Kevin had been involved with the affair partner for about 3 years, considering divorcing me and marrying her until their communication recently became sporadic. She had married Kevin's boss before meeting Kevin. Apparently, it was a shotgun wedding. They had just taken their 10th anniversary wedding photos. Of course, the evidence was sent to Kevin's company, and it was scheduled to be delivered to Kevin's boss today. The affair partner would also be receiving a certified mail by now.
Speak of the devil.
At that moment, Kevin's phone, placed on the table, rang, displaying his boss's name. Kevin didn't answer, so I tapped to take the call and put it on speaker. A furious shout, loud enough to break windows, erupted from the phone.
You've been betraying me? Having an affair with my wife during work hours is a betrayal to the company as well. Don't expect to stay comfortably at the company from tomorrow.
I'm sorry. Kevin's apology was pitiful, with none of the charm he once had. I pushed the divorce papers towards him, tapping on the name field twice.
So, will you sign the divorce papers for now? No.
With the prospect of remarrying his affair partner gone, Kevin stubbornly refused to divorce. I called out towards the door, seemingly in a quandary. Says he. This is a problem. What should we do?
Is someone there?
Kevin asked, fearfully looking towards me as I gestured with my eyes towards the door. As he reluctantly looked at the door, which then opened to reveal someone, Kevin's face turned pale, and he began to tremble.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Standing there were the in-laws. Kevin wasn't on good terms with the in-laws' house, and after we got married, he forbade me from interacting with the in-laws. So, for Kevin, the last people he expected to see here were present. My mother-in-law briefly greeted me before walking up to Kevin with a raised hand, delivering a sharp slap that left his face red. With a face even redder than Kevin's, my mother-in-law started shouting.
How could you? You have a wonderful wife like Isabella and you cheat? What have you done?
Wait, Mom, you and Isabella haven't seen each other since we got married. How would you know she's wonderful? Before I could answer Kevin's reasonable question, my father-in-law spoke up.
Isabella has been sending us letters every month, showing us how Evelyn is growing up. Recently, she and Evelyn even came to visit us a few times. You, who haven't contacted us even once since getting married, don't deserve such a good person. Hey! Didn't I tell you not to contact them? Why are you going behind my back?
Kevin turned away from my father-in-law and yelled at me. In reality, the in-laws' house is a farmhouse, where Kevin's brother and his wife live together. Kevin, who inexplicably despised this arrangement, would constantly criticize and make snide remarks towards his brother's wife, resulting in him being kicked out after graduating college. When I learned from the in-laws and Kevin's brother's family that Kevin forbade me from talking to them because he feared his misdeeds would be exposed, I felt dizzy from my poor judgment in men. When I sent the greeting letters, they would kindly call me back. That's how we secretly continued our relationship.
You were deceiving me? Who I associate with is none of your business. I don't want to hear it from a man who repeatedly cheats and gets involved in shady dealings.
As I retorted, Kevin was visibly frustrated. Suddenly, he defiantly signed the divorce papers.
Seems like you went through a lot of trouble. Fine, I'll divorce you, but don't expect to get any money or the house from me. What are you talking about? You won't be dividing anything. Everything will go to Isabella.
My mother-in-law interjected, nudging Kevin, who was overwhelmed by her. I watched him coldly before storing the divorce papers in my bag and leaving the restaurant with my lawyer. Afterward, I went to the municipal office to submit the divorce papers. Though it happened quicker than I thought, my heart felt incredibly calm. Kevin was fired from his small company after being accused of having an affair with his boss's wife and engaging in infidelity during work hours. Having handed over the house and money to me, he was left with nothing. Eventually, the in-laws took him back to their house temporarily before sending him off to a distant relative's place. Kevin's brother's wife, not having forgiven his past actions, refused to even let Kevin into the house. Actually, her daughter, who got married last year and is soon due for delivery, was coming home soon. It being summer, Kevin spent a night in a small shed on the property before being taken away early in the morning by the relative. The affair partner and her husband, Kevin's boss, although they didn't divorce, were forced to live with the boss's parents under constant surveillance and endured endless taunts and harassment from her mother-in-law. Kevin once escaped to see the affair partner, but she was just playing with him, and upon seeing him, she demanded,
"Give me some money to escape."
My mother-in-law learned through relatives that Kevin was devastated by this. Kevin returned to the relative's house, shocked. Now, Kevin works non-stop, and even on his rare days off, he can't go out satisfactorily due to the relative's surveillance. I continue to maintain a relationship with the in-laws as Evelyn's grandparents. My brother-in-law's family are great people, and we enjoy meals together during events, and I feel like I have gained a new family. Evelyn was a bit upset about being left out, but was very happy about the divorce. Now living nearby, we go out together twice a week. As for me, having moved to a region with many tourist spots, I'm immersing myself in hobbies at leisure. Owning 2 houses in the city center and renting them out, I can cover my living expenses with the rental income alone. So, the severance pay, remaining insurance money, and the settlement from Kevin's divorce are freely used for Evelyn's college expenses, my hobbies, and travel. I often think I should have divorced sooner, enjoying such a leisurely life.
Well, shall we go?
Holding the plane ticket Evelyn gave me for my birthday, I set off on a trip. I'm Isabella. I really dislike my parents. What bothers me the most is their obsession with what others think. They use their affectionate behavior towards me to win over people's approval. It seems like that's all that matters to them. So, at home, they were very strict with me. I was constantly nagged about etiquette and how to speak properly, down to the smallest detail. Naturally, I rebelled against that, but they never listened to what I had to say. All that mattered to them was appearing as good people in the eyes of others. They wanted me to play the role of a quiet, well-behaved child. As a young girl, I just convinced myself that it was how things were supposed to be. How long would I have to endure this? Would I have to live with this dissatisfaction forever? I want to get out of this house as soon as possible. Even as a child, I was consumed by this thought. But unexpectedly, a turning point came much sooner. It was when I was in elementary school. My sister Chloe was born. And she was much more pretty than me. It was only a matter of time before our parents' interest shifted from me to her. Eventually, all their love and attention fully turned to her. Thankfully, it allowed me to distance myself from my parents. I can finally be free, I thought, but it turned out they weren't done with me. I realized it during my senior year of high school. It was when I told my parents I wanted to get a job. Of course, I had always thought about leaving home since I was little. Graduating high school was my chance to leave. I had been looking forward to that opportunity for so long. But then, my father said something completely unexpected.
No way! You're going to college!
I was shocked by his forceful tone. Lately, my parents had been so focused on Chloe. I thought they would easily agree. Maybe he had some expectations for my future. Why do I have to go to college? With a glimmer of hope, I asked him. His response shattered my expectations completely.
You need a decent education to marry well, you know.
So that was it. I finally understood why my parents were so concerned about appearances. They were planning to use my marriage prospects to make their own lives easier.
I want to work!
I protested.
Then, are you going to pay for your moving expenses yourself?
He retorted. His words left me speechless. Given their concern for appearances, my parents had always given me an allowance. But I didn't have enough to afford a move. Moreover, my high school prohibited part-time jobs. There was virtually no way for me to earn the moving expenses myself. He knew it, which is why he said it. As I struggled to respond, he laughed.
We've spent quite a lot on raising you. Maybe you should pay us back for that?
That's...
If you don't like it, go to college.
He concluded. In the end, I couldn't argue back. But if I looked at it differently, they were offering to send me to college for free. As much as they might want to, they couldn't just force marriage or arranged matches on me against my will. So, I decided to obediently go to college, and then escape after graduation. After that, I enrolled in a local college. But since my education was just for the sake of appearances, I wasn't allowed to live alone. My father never really considered my academic pursuits at college.
I'll pay your tuition, but in return, you'll have to work part-time and contribute to the household expenses.
He said shortly after I started college. How much should I contribute? I asked.
Let's say $500 a month.
I wanted to focus on my studies, now that I was in college. But he would never listen to such a request. Reluctantly, I juggled part-time work with my college lectures. The amount I had to contribute as living expenses was no small sum. With reports and test studies, I could only work a few hours each day. It was a barely manageable amount. But I don't want to waste this opportunity. So, I sacrificed sleep, splitting my time between studying and part-time work. Eventually, I graduated from college and even secured a job at a real estate company. Now I can finally leave home. That's what I thought, but my plan was naive. When I told my father about my job, he said,
"It's fine for you to work, but you can't live alone." "Why not?"
I asked, puzzled.
"What if you end up with some bad guy if you live alone?" "Huh? Anyway, stay at home until you get married." "That's ridiculous." "Or can you pay back your college tuition right now? If so, I might consider letting you live alone." "That's impossible. I've been contributing part-time earnings to the household." "Then, give up on living alone,"
he said with a loud laugh. It seemed he had planned everything. Anticipating that, he had made me contribute to the household expenses. In the end, it was a life dictated by him. Was there no way for me to fight back? With these worries, I started working. But then, a new problem arose. He quit his job shortly after I started working. The reason was back pain. Of course, that was just a facade. He just didn't want to work anymore, and was clearly relying on my income. Still, I couldn't abandon my family. I had even researched ways to cut ties with them, wanting to become a stranger. But there's no way to completely sever ties with family. Parents will always be parents. There's no escaping that. Yet, I hadn't given up on escaping from home. Believing that one day I could live on my own, I diligently saved money. But my father would surely notice my plans. Several years had passed since I started working. One day, when I got home from work, there was a cake on the table. "What's this about?" I asked Chloe, and she replied with a smile, "I got accepted into college." "Really? Congratulations."
Thank you.
Chloe clapped her hands in joy. I felt happy for her too, but then my father's next words instantly dampened my mood. "Okay, so you'll be paying her tuition."
What? I have to pay it?
"Of course. I can't work because of my injury." What a thing to say. He looks perfectly healthy to anyone, but arguing with him would be pointless. It's true that he has no income. If I don't pay for Chloe's education, she won't be able to go to college. He knows that and is unabashed about it. That means my plans to live alone are pushed even further away. In his eyes, he gets Chloe's education and keeps me from moving out. Chloe is a good girl. Her presence allowed me, as a young girl, to keep my distance from our parents. I may not be close to Chloe, but I owe her that much. So, I decided to pay for her tuition. Looks like living alone just got further away. That night, I ended up drinking alone late into the night, grumbling about my father. Later, Chloe safely started college. I worked even harder to pay for her tuition. However, such a lifestyle naturally took its toll, and I started to feel worn out. One day, distracted by fatigue, I left my wallet at the entrance and left the house. Arriving at the bus station, I reached for my IC card to board the bus and realized I didn't have my wallet. Shoot. I left my wallet. I quickly remembered leaving it at the entrance. I called my mother, who was at home, and she said, "Chloe took your wallet to you. She had to go to college for something." "She did?" "She said she'd drop it off on her way." I immediately started running back home. Then, a few minutes from the bus stop, near a grocery store, I ran into Chloe. She was carrying a shopping bag from the store. "Chloe, do you have my wallet?" "Here it is." She handed me my wallet. I immediately checked the contents.
"You're so suspicious."
She teased. "I have the company's card in there. If I lose it, it's trouble for the company." The corporate card and the IC card were both inside. The money was untouched, and I felt relieved. "Thanks, Chloe." I thanked her and hurried back to the bus stop. Thanks to her, I managed to avoid being late. I need to be more careful from now on. That night, I bought a thank you cake for Chloe. She was delighted, and I was grateful. But at that time, I was making a big mistake. Some days later, Aria from accounting came to me at work. "Can I talk to you for a sec, Isabella?" She was a very reliable colleague. She often gave me clothes and cosmetics she didn't need, as I was living frugally. In many ways, I owed her a lot, both professionally and personally. So, I thought she wanted to talk about something personal, but it turned out to be a bit different, and Aria took me to a private place. "What's going on, Aria?" "Listen. I wanted to ask you, have you ever used the company card for personal reasons?" The company card she referred to was the corporate card. Designed for managing expenses in one place, the company had issued these cards to employees. Of course, as a salesperson, I also had a company-issued card. However, the charges were to be billed to the corporate account. So, using the card for personal reasons would be immediately noticeable. I think I've only used it during work hours," I replied, feeling anxious. I didn't recall doing anything wrong, but I couldn't completely rule out the possibility of it being used without my knowledge. As I was pondering, she said, "Actually, your card was used at a grocery store. It looks like it was for buying water. Do you remember?" "Grocery store, water." I thought hard about it. Then, I remembered the day I forgot my wallet. For a brief moment that day, Chloe had my wallet. I normally never let anyone else handle my wallet, especially at work. Therefore, if someone else used the card, it had to have been Chloe on that day. Well, do you know the date it was used? I didn't want to suspect Chloe. I asked Arya, hoping to prove it wasn't her. If the card was used on a different day, then she wouldn't be the culprit. I must have been absent-minded and accidentally used the company card. That's what I wanted to believe, but reality was harsh. The card had been used on the very day I forgot my wallet. Is there anything you can recall? Arya asked. On impulse, I blurted out.
Oh. I might have mistaken it for my IC card.
Really?
I sometimes buy water before work.
I see.
I'm really sorry about that.
I paid the amount that had been charged right there. I made excuses in a panic, but Arya comforted me, saying, "Don't worry, I've made the same mistake before." I was worried it might happen again. Driven by anxiety, I asked Arya for a favor right then and there. "Are you sure? It'll be extra work for you, Isabella." "Yes. I don't want to repeat the same mistake." "Okay, I'll take care of it." "Thank you so much." Thus, I managed to avoid turning it into a big issue. But I knew there wouldn't be a second chance. If something similar happened again, it would surely be a major problem. That's why I took the initiative. That incident was a significant turning point for me. I had always thought Chloe was a good girl, but she was a child doted on by our father. She never rebelled against him. If she's aware of everything, maybe she's just pretending to be good, not just outside the house, but in front of me as well. At that moment, I found her smile strangely frightening. My parents were trying to use me for their own benefit. So, I was already cautious of them, especially my father. But now, I had to be wary of Chloe too. What should I do? The thought of living with my parents and Chloe became scary. I had always wanted to leave, but now more than ever. After much thought, I confided in my boyfriend, Timothy. "Why don't we get married then?" he said casually. I was at a loss for words. He smiled. "If we're married, you can leave your house. I'm a civil servant, so they probably won't object." That's true. He and I were classmates in college. We'd been dating for over 5 years, and I had been thinking it might be time. But I had my family to consider. I couldn't easily say yes to marriage. However, I had told him about my family's problems. He had listened and advised me on various things. Despite all that, he was still willing to marry me. "Please, I'd appreciate it." So, I decided to get married. But it wasn't just happiness filling me up. There were too many problems, especially with my father. It wasn't certain that he would agree to the marriage. I'll have to persuade him carefully. I decided to take my time convincing him. But as I hesitated to bring up the topic of marriage at home, time just passed by. Half a year went by like that. I need to say something soon, I thought to myself. Then, unexpectedly, my father and I got into an argument.
"Enough. I've told you many times to marry the person I introduced." "That's impossible. I'm seeing someone." "What? Who is the guy?" "He's a civil servant. A good person."
He fell silent at my words and seemed to be thinking. I took the chance to say,
"He's willing to give a generous dowry. That should satisfy you, right?"
He looked hesitant. That could work. I decided to push through.
"How much should the dowry be?" $30,000.
I thought that was a lot. But when I mentioned it to Timothy, he agreed to provide it. Thus, with his help, I was able to leave my home. Once the decision was made, everything else went smoothly. I started preparing to move right away. Then, on a certain Sunday, I arranged for the movers to come. During the move, Chloe approached me.
"Just keep your promise to pay for my tuition, okay?"
That's fine, but can I ask you something? You've used my card without permission, haven't you?
"Oh, you found out, huh?"
she said, without any sign of remorse. I had tried several times to confront her about the truth, but never got the chance. I gathered my courage to ask, but it seemed like no big deal to her. Using someone else's card is a crime. Do you understand that?
"It's fine, we're family. aren't we?
She replied, showing no guilt. I was infuriated. I'll deposit the tuition money into the designated account. But that's it. Consider it severance. Huh? Once I leave this house, we're strangers. Do whatever you want. She walked off with a scoff. Later that evening, when the moving was done, I went to the living room where my father was waiting. Where's the money? It's always about money with you. Here it is.
I've always dreamed of profiting from marrying you off to someone well off since you were born.
Well, this should be enough. I've contributed plenty to this house already.
Yeah, now it's all up to Chloe's future spouse.
He smirked, his comment dripping with sarcasm. He might keep coming back to ask for more money. That thought makes me angry. But when that time comes, I'll just have to turn him away. Then we had our last meal as a family. Chloe wasn't there, though. According to my mother, she was out with friends. Better not to see her. After the meal, I gathered my belongings and decided to leave the house. But as I was leaving, I ran into Chloe.
Oh? Still here, Isabella? Ah, right, here, I'm returning this.
Without a word, she handed something over. I looked down and saw it was the company card. I quickly checked my wallet.
Only realizing now? I took it when I was in your room.
You're so clueless. I clenched my teeth. Clearly, she had used it without permission. That's when it hit me. Chloe brazenly admitted.
I used your card for drinks and meals for about 100 people, so check it up.
Then, without being asked, she started telling me all about it. She talked about a reunion she had and going to an all-you-can-eat, one thing after another. She even mentioned choosing an expensive restaurant, thinking about the card's limit. That really made me angry. So, I retorted, who are you, exactly?
What? You were serious about us being strangers once you left home? But what about the tuition fee?
She kept bothering me about it.
The bank card for the tuition fees has been given to Dad,
I said, and quickly walked away. Afterwards, I joined Timothy and started our new married life. Nothing much changed, though. I continued working, and the only real change was our home. But that was the biggest change for me. I was filled with a sense of freedom I had never felt before. I hoped this happiness would last a long time while enjoying life with him. About half a year went by. One day at work, Chloe showed up.
You're here. Come out.
She caused a scene at the company reception. Hearing it, I rushed to the reception. Chloe.
There you are. What do you think you're doing, you liar?
She yelled the moment she saw me. She started shouting at me, showing me her bank card.
I got a call saying the tuition couldn't be withdrawn, and I was embarrassed, you know.
What are you talking about? I made sure to deposit it.
Huh? But it clearly hasn't been withdrawn.
Don't you even know how to check your bank card? Are you really a university student?
Of course I am, 4th year at a national university. I've even secured a job.
She yelled. Sighing, I explained. I deposited this year's $5,000 tuition fee. Here's the deposit record, see?
That's exactly it. That amount was withdrawn from the card. You must have done it.
It was you who withdrew it, right?
I don't even have a card. So it was you.
But I heard you paid for foods for 100 people with it, didn't I?
Foods? What foods?
Don't you remember paying for an all-you-can-eat for 100 people with the card? As I questioned her, her face turned pale. In a panic, she started making excuses.
I used your company card, but it's a corporate card, so.
Clearly, she didn't understand. So, I explained to her carefully. A corporate card withdraws from the corporate account. That's correct knowledge.
So, the card I used was.
But once, someone used my card without permission. So, I had the withdrawals changed to my personal account.
Personal account?
What I had was indeed a corporate card. That was when I realized. The withdrawals were being made from my personal account, not the corporate account. That setup, while involving more paperwork for expense claims, allowed for private use of the card. Essentially, it eliminated the need to carry multiple cards. Plus, if someone else used it, the company wouldn't suffer any damage. Meaning, when she paid for the drinks, it was already set to withdraw from my personal account. So, the amount for the drinks is gone. It's your responsibility since you used it.
What about the university tuition?
I paid what was asked of me. You'll have to figure out the rest. With that, she began to make even more noise. Eventually, the police arrived and restrained her.
No! That's not me!
What do you mean? You admitted to using my card.
That was...
I clearly told you. Using someone's card without permission is a crime.
But...
Think about what you've done. In the end, she was taken to the police station for questioning. However, I didn't file a complaint. I didn't see the need, especially since someone had uploaded her outburst at my company on social media. Unsurprisingly, it quickly drew a wave of criticism. She ended up being expelled from her university. After that, my parents, who concerned about appearances, moved to the countryside with her. It seemed they thought they could escape the scandal by leaving town. Their plan was to find a marriage partner for Chloe there and then extort money from him. But given their bad characters, it was unlikely to work. I heard they quickly got into trouble with Chloe's new partner.
Isabella! We're being sued for damages! Help us!
My father contacted me about a month after I moved. Causing trouble within just a month, they would likely repeat the same mistakes.
I'm sorry, but if you come to our house, I'll file a complaint about the previous incident.
Be prepared for that. After I said that, he stopped contacting me. But with no money and no job, I couldn't help but worry. So, I had a private investigator secretly check on them, and they turned out to be working together at a logistics warehouse. Apparently, it was the company of the person Chloe had clashed with. They must have been told to work off the debt if they couldn't pay it. Hearing they were working long hours in a gloomy warehouse, I felt a bit relieved. They should be able to pay off the damages and earn their living expenses. I decided to let them fend for themselves and keep working. Meanwhile, Timothy and I continued our happy married life. My job was going well, and my sales performance was steadily improving. With no family around, money was accumulating. All that good fortune made me a little apprehensive about the future. But for now, I want to fully enjoy this happiness I've finally attained with Timothy.